Okay, guys, I'm Shane Steinmetz, and I'm the director of Fetcher. It's a Jungle Scout tool that helps Amazon sellers track their business performer. And I'm also an avid FBA seller. I'm really excited because today I have two experts to talk about a very complex subject, sales tax. I've got Paul Raffleson, I've got Scott Scharf. Paul, as you may already know, is an experienced sales tax attorney who has served on several legal teams, including massive companies like Walmart and General Electric and Microsoft. And then we have Scott. And Scott's the founder of Catching Clouds, which is an e-commerce accounting service. And Scott is our all-around e-commerce guru today. So I've asked these subject matter experts to join me in this discussion because it is very complex. Amazon, sales tax, the United States, what's going on? So guys, thanks very much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see if I can summarize the situation just a little bit. I think we all understand that e-commerce is still pretty new, and it's safe to say that regulators are still catching up. States haven't quite figured out how to adequately collect sales tax on e-commerce sales, specifically on Amazon sales, and that's frustrating states. So where are we today? Well, there's a federal organization called the MTC, which is the Multi-State Tax Commission, and they have essentially concluded that Amazon sellers, that is the seller, is going to be responsible for collecting sales tax. And they've offered an amnesty program for sellers, which would essentially exclude sellers from paying any back taxes as long as they get on board today. It's a get out of jail free card. You could think of it that way. 24 states are participating in this program, and the offer expires on October 17th. So we're just 2 weeks out from the expiration of this MTC announcement, which is why we're here today talking with this expert panel. But there is some debate about whether or not the MTC announcement is fair and who should ultimately be responsible for collecting sales tax. That's really at the heart of this question. Should it be Amazon? Should it be the third-party seller? That's the sort of thing that we're going to dive into today and try to understand better. So ultimately, our goal is to give you, the Amazon seller, the information you need to make a decision about how you're going to respond to the MTC program. Because ultimately, as Amazon sellers, we're responsible for our businesses, and we're going to have to make a decision whether to comply or not comply with this program. So I think my guests today have slightly different perspectives on how Amazon sellers should be reacting to the MTC announcement. And so now it's going to be time to get these guys involved. Scott, let's start with you. Why would you recommend participating in this program if you're an Amazon seller?
I think it's great in the point of it's bringing the awareness to sellers. And really my key point is making sure that sellers, like in this session or whatever else, take the time to understand how it impacts them and their business and that they've made a decision. Okay. I do think that for some sellers, especially larger sellers that have been selling on FBA for years, okay, that it's an opportunity that they should seriously consider. So I'm not a SALT, sales and local tax official expert CPA or lawyer, but we deal with this every day for the last 5 years, being such a critical component for sellers. But talking to all of them, the SALT experts that I partner with and talk to and collaborate with and talk about sales tax with, which is weird, is that this type of amnesty is really rare. And that the states don't normally say it's an unlimited look back. Once they clear it out, there's no liability. They're not going to look back a little time, and that this is a fairly broad one. I would also tweak your comments about the MTC. The MTC is a nonprofit governmental organization that is there to, in my opinion, herd the cats that are the states into agreeing typically on being consistent between their different things and that they're not too wildly different, which they are. And then the main thing they do day to day when there's not an amnesty is they do multi-state voluntary disclosure agreements. So what they're doing is they're doing exactly what their purpose is to help businesses that have realized that they've gotten in trouble with multiple states and they didn't know, like an FBA seller. And their whole job is to do those at no cost. You're not paying, a couple $1,000s per state to a SALT or another consultant. So they're in there and they're really not there. All they're doing is trying to get the states to agree on something. But I really think that it's an opportunity for people to consider, to look at the numbers of how much open liability they have. If anybody doesn't know, it's about $6,000 to $8,000 per $100,000 in sales. Now that's spread across 20 plus states, but if you have no idea, Just total up your sales from the first time you shipped anything to Amazon, and that's roughly what the total numbers are. If you want to know, if you're like, do I owe $500 or do I owe $200,000? That is just a key way to do it. And so first, they should consider it and understand they can take advantage of the amnesty and leverage it. The big gotcha is not just doing sales tax, is the amnesty, is signing up for income tax in those states as well. It's also only, I think it's 9 of the states are FBA states. So just keep in mind, it's not all of them. The next thing is it's completely voluntary. Okay, you can do one state, you can do all states. Unfortunately, if you do the amnesty, you're going to be signing up for both sales tax and income tax. Or their next option is to register and collect going forward in all of those states and ignore the amnesty because they don't want that liability across one state, 5 states, all 23 states today to get any larger, even though there is a point risk of putting the wrong date, even if you have no idea how to find the right date of the first time you had Nexus. Or you can do the official version, ignore the amnesty, go to all the states, pay all this historical sales tax you didn't know about, and any fines and penalties and everything else. Or the last option is do nothing, okay? And that is a valid risk management decision. And that's all I care about is people understand, and for their own business, their own risk tolerance, the available cash they have to pay for compliance, that they make that decision for themselves. And so I'll stop there, but those are the different pieces. So I think amnesty is a great opportunity as long as you understand how it impacts your business and you make a decision for yourself.
Great. And Paul, to you, I would pose the question, what are your concerns with the MTC program?
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily give the MTC such an altruistic definition. I think there's, their origination came from a time when, in 1967, when states were being faced with the possibility of federal legislation that controlled state and local tax, and this sort of multi-state tax compact, and the MTC came about as sort of an answer to that. So that sort of basically saying, Congress, we don't need to be regulated at the federal level in terms of how we collect tax, and the idea was to promote uniform tax compliance rules that were easy, and that's completely fallen by the wayside. And the MTC claims at this point that they're really not driving any policy, that they're facilitating this. And I spoke with Marshall Stromberg, who's the deputy director, former commissioner, director of Florida Department of Revenue, about this for a long time. And they simply claim that they're just facilitating the will of the states. And while that's great, I think that there's a little bit more to it than that, because part of the problem is, in some states, I have real doubt as to whether there's some political motivation about whether or not they can take action against Amazon. And I don't say that out of speculation. I say that because I've had that conversation with some pretty important states about just sort of the political, problem with being able to openly ask Amazon to collect the tax. And so what are they left with? I've been told that some states have signed agreements with Amazon, and for some reason they think that because they signed those agreements with Amazon, that prevents them from collecting, that somehow excuses their ability to go collect from you. But the other part of it that really bothers me is that a lot of states I've spoken to simply don't understand your facts. They do not understand what Amazon sellers sell. And I say sellers, there's nothing wrong with calling you sellers. You're just not retailers, and we can get into that later. But suppliers sell too, so you can be sellers, but they don't know your facts. They don't know the nuances of what makes an Amazon seller different than an eBay seller or even a Craigslist seller. I've had states ask me how many people on Amazon still use money orders. I don't know if you remember back in the day when Amazon first started its marketplace, people would send money orders to people. I mean, that's who you're dealing with. That's who's making this decision. People who have no idea how your facts work. And they relied on the MTC for that critical information, that critical business information about how your business works. They relied on the MTC to do their job, and they didn't. Okay, I spoke with the MTC. I spoke with Richard Cram. When I talked to him, he did not know what things like commingling were. He didn't know about the fact that you have absolutely no control over your things like return policy. He's saying things like you're the mall, but you're not the mall, because I don't go to the mall and pay the mall, and I don't complain to the mall, and all those things that malls don't do that Amazon does makes them not the mall. So it's sort of, the whole thing stinks from the beginning because the facts, it's just based on bad facts. And then you layer on, okay, the constitutionality of it all. I mean, Right. It's 9 income tax states. Well, every accountant I've spoken to, and I've polled a few, $500 at best, more realistically, closer to $1,000 per income tax return. Sales tax returns. Wait till they start having FBA centers in Louisiana, and you're filing not just in the state of Louisiana, but in every parish. Jefferson County, I think there's over 150 or something parishes you could be filing at $30 a return, which is what the last webinar I did, somebody from Peisner said that they estimate the cost of compliance to be about $30 a sales tax return, even if it's 20. I mean, the fact is, if you're a mom and pop operation or whatever that means, you know, you're somebody who's not making a ton of money on Amazon, or you're making a good living, but nothing crazy. And all of a sudden you have the same compliance burden as Google, and your cost of compliance is going to run you out of business. And there's hundreds of thousands of you. That's a big problem at the constitutional level. I mean, that's what we call a burden on interstate commerce. And states cannot do that. They cannot burden interstate commerce, especially if there's a way to do it without burdening interstate commerce, which would simply be having Amazon collect the tax. So,
okay, so Paul, let's leave it at that for a minute. We'll get into the details here as we carry on the webinar. But let me now pose the question to you guys, because I think people are just curious about the background of MTC. Fortunately, kind of Scott corrected my lingo there when I said that it was a federal organization. I understand now that it's truly a nonprofit organization. And so they've had a mirage of responsibilities, I guess, and sometimes that's confusing to sellers. So I would like to ask the question to you guys. Do you know why this program came about? It sounds like it's a pretty rare case for Amnesty to be offered across the board. You know, where did this program come from? It does seem that it came up overnight. Was Amazon at the negotiating table? Were sellers at the negotiation table? Is this actual legislation? You know, give us a little bit more background about the program if you're comfortable doing so. And I pose the question to either of you two gentlemen.
There was an article in a publication called State Tax Notes that was featuring what I was doing, and actually there was one even before I got involved, that pretty much went into explaining that an organization called Prosper had reached out to the MTC and negotiated this situation. And basically the way the states understand it, because I've spoken to a number of commissioners and tax directors and chief counsels of a lot of states in the last month or two, is that they were under the understanding this is what everyone in Amazon land wanted. That this was them representing the Amazon community, and they wanted that. And the 60 days was sort of a quid pro quo, the 60-day time frame, which is ridiculous, because in order sort of to waive the back taxes, the quid pro quo was that they get to participate in Christmas 2017 or holiday 2017. So that was how this was all negotiated. There was some deal with Prosper. Now, if you want me to tell you whether or not Amazon was involved, I couldn't possibly tell you. I speculate, but I'm not going to, you know, there's clearly no direct evidence that I've seen that says Amazon was in any way involved. But
okay. And Scott, what do you know? Do you have anything else to add to the way that you understand that this formation of the program came around?
Yeah. So I actually introduced James Thompson of the Prosper Show and Richard Cram, who I've been talking to for a couple of years now, about, hey, this is the reality, and, you know, being aware and looking at all the things that are there to qualify and quantify what my clients and any other sellers I walk into do or don't have to do. What does it take to be 100% compliant? So I introduced them, and he invited Richard to be a speaker at this year's Prosper Show, okay, along with Michael Fleming, who also talked about sales tax, because James Thompson really cares about his community, okay? And it's not just the Prosper Show community, it's all the Amazon seller community that he helped start when he was at Amazon. So, and this actually isn't part of the core of what Prosper Show does, but he realized that this was a big deal to all of these sellers, and that quite a few sellers, if you accept that Nexus and all the other components, which we'll get into more, was a big deal for his sellers. So he talked to Richard Cram and said, hey, is there anything that can be done to protect these sellers that had no idea that were at risk because they were unaware of this Nexus challenge, and that some or all states could come after them for sales tax liability and put them out of business? Okay, his concern was for his community. So he talked to Richard Cram, who proposed it to the states and said, hey, we have a group, okay, a class, a class action, whatever group of people that we could say take advantage of it. This isn't just one company at a time coming to the MCC, and it fit with their mission of doing a multi-state voluntary disclosure. In this case, it included an amnesty component to it. And so in the normal regular monthly meetings, and you can go back through the notes of all those meetings, Richard Graham proposed it to the states, and they started negotiating what the states were willing to do, which states wanted to join, which ones didn't. And they went back and forth, and it was a matter of negotiating across those 24 states and all the other states that chose not to participate. And it kind of evolved, and it really was. And if you've listened, I've listened to the minutes of the last couple ones. I've not listened to every single one. That they really was a matter of, hey, okay, we're asking for a full amnesty, and here's what the states were willing to offer, and they wanted to define it. And correct, they wanted the holiday tax money. They wanted to include income tax, which wasn't there. And that's what they came through. And it's still all voluntary. And that's how it evolved. And it really fits with the mission of the MTC to do this, is to do voluntary disclosure agreements, which is what this is.
It's not just a mission to do. I mean, they are an organization. They're not a nonprofit. Don't give them the title that makes them sound like they're this altruistic. They are an organization that represents the interests of state tax departments.
Correct.
Wrong a lot. I've defended MTC audits, and I win a lot because they're not right most of the time. They take very aggressive positions. And in this case, I'm not sure if it's aggressive or just simply a lack of facts or a combination of the two, but they didn't do their homework. And why that deal was negotiated without anybody with a state and local tax background from a legal perspective is beyond me, because I think any lawyer in the room with that background would not have let this happen, because it's totally just unconstitutional from the start. And then when you go down the layer, you start peeling the onion even more, you realize there's just nothing, there's no substance behind this that could ever make you people liable. But I can tell you that, I can't take the fear away. I can't stop states from going after you. I deal with states going after me all the time, my companies, but my companies have multi-million-dollar litigation budgets and they can handle it. So they can handle the force of a state.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I think you guys did a nice job outlining the history of this organization and at least how the Prosper Show partnered with the organization, and the deal is on the table now. I understand from Scott's perspective, it was done on behalf of the Amazon seller, and Paul, you have some concerns about how the deal was done. But now let's at least talk about what you were just alluding to, which is the likelihood that states can actually go after the seller, because I know that's what's in the back of the minds of the Amazon sellers listening right now. So you said that you've dealt with cases with the states in the past, Paul. I'd like to hear from your perspective how likely you think it is that states are actually going to track down these non-compliant sellers, those that don't participate in the MTC, seeking back taxes. Do we have examples of this? I'd like to ask that to both of you.
Well, first of all, let me explain when I say I deal with states going after companies. I'm talking about companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies with huge litigation budgets and huge trade organizations and organizations that represent their interests just in state tax that can defend themselves fine, okay? My being here is indicative of the problem. I'm not a lawyer that most people in the Amazon community should ever need. I'm like an antitrust lawyer in the respect that you need me as much as you need an antitrust lawyer. So the fact that I'm here is already sort of a sign that there's a big problem and a big mismatch with what the states are doing in terms of how much force they're directing at you versus how much they should be. Okay? So I'm in shock personally that they would do this, that they would go after individual sellers and hunt them down. Can they do it? Absolutely. They don't even have to audit each one of you individually. They could just do a mail merge based on a list and send you all really nasty letters. And if you don't respond, those nasty letters turn into liens. I mean, there's some pretty powerful stuff these states can do. It's wrong. It's unconstitutional. And I don't know what's worse, complying and going out of business because you can't afford the cost of compliance, or just taking the risk. I don't know what's worse. I just know that it's wrong.
So let me ask you, Scott, from your experience, I know you've been talking with lots of sellers. Are you seeing states like Washington and California, who are a bit more notorious, going after sellers and having their way with sellers?
So correct. Now, the chance of being audited is really, really low. Okay. None of my clients have. The people I've talked to, it's really hard to get people to both admit that they've been audited, but it is happening more often. The salt people I know were seeing none a few years ago, and now they're seeing a handful of businesses. Keep in mind, there's about 200,000 sellers, over 100,000 a year. Okay, that piece. And then there's another 3 million sellers. Okay, so there's below that level. So it's a large community, and the chance of being audited even today is extremely low from an individual perspective. Okay.
Okay. So I like that you shaped this at the beginning as a potential risk management decision, as most decisions are for business owners. So I'll let you carry on with that thought. But if you could also just talk to the fact that a lot of sellers are thinking about the size of their business and the scope of their business, and comparing them with the sort of companies that Paul's been dealing with, and thinking there's no way they're going to come after my business. I'm doing, $5,000 in revenue a month or something like that. Is there a scale here, and what are you seeing?
Well, you would hope that they really look and rank the sellers based on who's selling $100,000 a month or more versus anybody else below, or whatever their threshold is, and that they're not going after the really small sellers because the cost benefit isn't there. Now, as business owners, we think that way. Government might go, oh, look, we found a list of names and we're going to email everybody and not look at their unique situations. And one thing to say, I think sales tax is overly complex. Okay. I think it's unfair. I think it's difficult. Our goal is being experts on how to manage and collect as close to the right amount as possible, and how to get that filed so that, anybody we're working with is as compliant as possible, but it's so insanely complex that it's really hard to do. It's a tough decision on a business to understand those costs. So the chance of being audited is very low. Okay. The states, if they do get you on a list, but the big thing for awareness is it's much bigger than it was before. So as soon as Amazon was collecting tax in all 45 states, and all 45 states got half of the income they expected, because about half of Amazon's business is their business, and the other half are the 3P sellers. They went, well, we want that other business. Where that other tax? Where is it? And as soon as they did that, that kind of increased the awareness. Okay. You've got the case where that's going on right now this week, where a court in Massachusetts and a judge has ordered Amazon to turn over the list back to 2012 of anybody that had inventory in Amazon. Amazon hasn't agreed to do it yet. This could take a long time.
Doing that because they're trying to get covered, because I am sure some class action lawyer somewhere is figuring out that there's probably something behind this where you guys are all paying a lot of money to comply with something, and Amazon, maybe they didn't warn you. I don't know. There's probably, I just know class action lawyers are very creative, and they're probably looking for cover. And that's what this is about, because realistically, Amazon doesn't need it. They know that this is information the states are entitled to. Okay. I've dealt with information states are entitled to my whole life. This is not shocking. Okay. But they need to be compelled by a court. So optically it looks like, okay, we did everything we could, but let's not look into that too much. I'm not really thinking that's a dog and pony.
And all I'm saying is the awareness is higher, and that there's more and more in the states are aware. This Amnesty brought it to all their attention. Some of the states might have been going, really? There's a warehouse in our state? There's more awareness, and they can use the same tools like Jungle Scout and others to find the top 100, top 1,000, top 10,000 sellers too. They can use the same tools, and there's a whole industry of tools that's of software companies that sell tool to state auditors to help them look for these things. And unfortunately, there's it's more in my opinion that I think the states really have a tough time passing tax increases. So they're really focusing on how much income. And I agree that it's against the Commerce Clause. I think it's overly complex. I have some better ideas on how I think it should be collected. I think it's unfair that if as individuals we owe use tax if we don't pay sales tax, and that I should be on the hook for not paying sales tax on a few items I buy off Amazon versus one of my clients or some seller at whatever size being responsible for complying when sales tax and use tax are two sides of the same coin. If you don't collect sales tax at the point of sale, the consumer should be responsible for paying use tax in that state where they're in, versus going after a seller for $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 in liability that they were unaware of, that puts them out of business. Okay, that I agree that it's completely unfair, but the visibility is much higher.
But it's not just unfair; it's legally incorrect. You've got the state of South Carolina
decide to go after people,
actually litigating this exact issue, which should be sending big alarm bells off to all the other states if this wasn't a political issue, that they have it wrong. That Amazon is responsible for collecting the tax legally in every state. And if they weren't, if that legal fiction that somehow the FBA relationship gets them off the hook, then you know what? Walmart and Target and all the big box retailers in every state could actually imitate the FBA relationship with their suppliers and not be responsible for collecting in their physical retail locations. That's just how absurd the idea is, that Amazon can sort of contract their way out of collecting tax on a sale when they're a retailer with nexus in the state. It's just complete nonsense.
Well, let's get to that in just a second, if you guys don't mind. We'll get to nexus and the story about inventory and the definition of a retailer versus seller, that sort of thing. We'll get to that in a second. But before we do, I really want to try to drive this point home that Scott is making, which is that there does seem to be an increase in likelihood that states are going to come after sellers. It seems that will probably be larger sellers. But what I don't have any quantifiable data to support, Scott or Paul, is that states are actually having success challenging sellers and they're actually accruing back taxes. Do we have any tangible cases? Because I know a $100 million seller who's been getting nasty emails for the last year and nothing has come of it. So I'm curious if it's happening.
I get contacted by sellers who make barely any money at all by Washington. Washington State is the most aggressive. Now, I'm not surprised considering who sits in Washington State, but I'm telling you, everybody's getting targeted. They're not applying the same standards that they said they would apply when you had streamlined sales tax or Main Street and all those other, tax things where they try to put in these mitigating factors to sort of make it so it's not a crazy burden on someone who just has, a little bit of sales with it. They're just going after everybody like it's the Wild West. And I every day I speak to people all over the country who are getting nasty letters from the state of Washington. And I'm actually in the process of working with a law firm to file basically a cease and desist in Washington to stop them from collecting action on any seller, because this is it's absolutely absurd. And that and that's part of the reason why we've been asking for support, because we're not getting what we need, because we want to do those things. We want to file.
We'll get to that. We'll get to the call to action in a bit, Paul. Scott, go ahead.
So, no, I agree that they're getting aggressive. They're choosing to enforce their laws. The way the states see them, and that's kind of today. I agree that this should be fixed at a federal level. I agree that these changes, I just think it's going to take time. And we're in this short window because of the amnesty that people need to be aware of, that they have a choice to take advantage of this amnesty or register and collect going forward, or not do anything and wait and just decide that they're smaller and that the cost to comply, is more than they can handle as a business today. And I don't want one of my clients to be one of the ones that's fighting this, working with lawyers and fighting it at the state level and then up to the Supreme Court. I want my clients to be aware and have made a decision. Now, you can handle it either way. If things change, legally, however they're fighting, however Amazon fights this and whatever changes in this process, and we get a year out or 2 years out, and none of them had to comply, and it's defined, and it goes through the courts, and it gets there either per state at a time or at the federal level or some other level, that it all gets cleared up, you can roll that back, and you paid too much now. But there is a risk, especially if it's a smaller seller, if you don't have a lot of cash flow, that you should consider taking advantage of this or making sure that liability doesn't grow. And that's really the key things that I want people to make the decision. And so I know we're going to talk later. I can talk about quantifying what's the overhead, what's it going to cost them to register, what's it going to cost them to do all this, so they can look at roughly what's it going to cost them per state, so they can add that up and see if they have it in their budget.
Multiplying your total sales by an average rate, but the reality is there's still, most people I talk to, I hear Texas, Florida, and then the only two states that seem to be really material for a lot of sellers that are participating. California. And then I hear New York and California as being California being the biggest, and Washington, and they're not even participating. So, you're getting some cover, but you're still a ton of risk everywhere else. And
we'll get to the costs. We will get to the costs, I promise. Let's just try to take it a step at a time, because there is so much to digest. There's so much information out there for the seller that's not a wizard like you guys. So maybe now we really do get to the crux of this discussion. It seems to so much come down to the definitions of retailers versus who has nexus. Essentially, who is the seller / retailer? Is it Amazon, or is it the third party seller supplier? Who has nexus? Ultimate control of the inventory in each one of these states. Is it Amazon or the third party seller or supplier? Why don't I toss that one to Scott to get started? Because I know, Scott, that is sort of the crux of this discussion, and I know we're not going to argue our way to success here, but this is where a lot of people are getting confused as to how we should be thinking about ourselves as suppliers and whether or not the MTC has it right or wrong in the way that they're categorizing us.
Okay, so my point is that Amazon has Vendor Central and a 1P B2B relationship with a huge number of sellers, including smaller sellers, even though it's invite-only program. And in that case, Amazon is purchasing the product, they place a purchase order, they buy the product, they're responsible for all the taxes, okay? And that's that 50% of Amazon sales, okay? For a 3P, someone selling on Seller Central, Amazon contract, and I've read it a couple times, I'm not a lawyer, but it specifically says that the customers are responsible for sales tax, okay? Both anything related to Amazon and anything else. All my clients are multi-channel sellers, so they've got sales tax responsibilities outside of, and other warehouses outside of FBA, but looking at FBA, and that there's a clear definition between those two things. This isn't Amazon's unaware. Now, it is problematic that you have no control of where you send that inventory, and you can't control where it's moved around, but sellers can control and get it back. So it's yours to get back. You can destroy it. And that they can manage it. So there's a portion that's out of control that can definitely be challenged, but you send 1,000 widgets and Amazon's going to disperse that across a ton of warehouses and store your products. And it's really your property, even if it's out of your control, until the consumer signs for it at the end thing. It's gone to a common carrier and someone else has bought it. And then if it's returned back to you. There are nuances around commingled inventory and control, but that to me is where you have it. Plus Amazon has a service, which you have to pay them an extra 1.5% or 2% to collect the sales tax for you. And then Amazon takes that sales tax income, even though it's not on the payment screen, and puts it in your settlement statement. So they collect sales tax, which they charge you as a service, and they hand it. So there's some very clear definitions that Amazon, both in their contracts and everything else, says we're not responsible. Whether that's legal or not, it hasn't been challenged, but that is the current relationship a 3P Seller Central person has.
Why the hell do I care what the Amazon?
Paul, hold on, man.
What the state law says. I
Paul,
don't care.
hold on 1 second, my man.
Out of this stuff.
Hold on 1 second. We're going to give you your fair shake at this. Scott, did you have anything more on that?
So because of that, and because you can run a report out of Amazon that says that where is all of my inventory stored, because I voluntarily gave it to FBA. You can be fulfilled prime, or you can be a seller fulfilled prime and only have Nexus in your own state and not store anything in FBA. Or you can contract other warehouses, 3PL warehouses across the country, including ones being built right next to Amazon FBA warehouses, to fulfill your products. So you can make business decisions to limit your Nexus. Okay. And that by choosing to sell on FBA, which has a ton of benefits and it's fast and it's easy and you hand it off and you get prime and of course high fees to Amazon, but that's a choice, and that you can do things as a business to limit your Nexus if this is something you're concerned about and you don't want to deal with. So my view is that that's where you have Nexus. It's your product. You're choosing to use FBA, and the states have said if you're storing property or inventory in those states, that creates Nexus. And that's really the foundation of where we're coming from, to say that's what's going on. So I can stop there to say those are the key things that tell me that sellers have Nexus. And then it's a decision on the cost to comply as to whether they register or not.
All right. Now let's let Paul take a shot at it. Paul, what do you say to that position on Nexus?
Well, first of all, it's funny to me because you know this better than I do, Shane. Maybe Jungle Scout community knows this better. But Jungle Scout community, their strategy is you manufacture consumer goods, and those goods are basically purchased through the third-party distribution platform that is Amazon, right? And so for most Jungle Scout people, they're not going to be able to. People don't purchase directly from like their website, right? It has to go through the
That's
platform.
correct.
Okay.
I'd say 99% of the sales of Jungle Scout customers are going through Amazon's platform. Yes, that's true.
I'm looking at the definition of a retailer under the National Retail Federation, the organization that Amazon's lobbying organization, the one that Amazon, I think, got Retailer of the Year not too long ago from and contributes plenty of money to. And it says you are not a retailer if your company manufactures consumer goods that can only be purchased through third-party distribution partners, excluding franchisees, and there's no way for a consumer to purchase directly from your company. And their own lobbying organization even tells you you're not a retailer. I mean, it's bloody obvious at this point that this is a complete legal fiction that Amazon is perpetuating, that you guys are retailers. It's obvious to the states. It's obvious to every single person I speak to at the state level. And it's just a matter of the politics of going after Amazon. And that's the problem. The whole thing is, unfortunately, the whole thing is a fraud. It just is. And yes, you're getting a get out of jail free card, but you're also being falsely accused of doing something wrong. So I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, you can comply. You can go ahead and comply if you want to. You need to know what you're complying with. I guess at the end of the day, that's what it is. The nexus issue is really not relevant because you know what? Coca-Cola and Georgia, I know for a fact, Coca-Cola and Walmart both have nexus in Georgia. It doesn't mean Coca-Cola collects its own tax inside the Walmart. There's nothing inside that Coke and Walmart could ever execute. No contract, no legal fiction between Coca-Cola and Walmart that would ever get Walmart off the hook from the state's perspective from collecting the sales tax. Okay, if they try to pull that, the state of Georgia would simply say, good luck with that. We're going to go after you, Walmart, and take you to court, and eventually Walmart will lose. And that's what I'm saying. It's clear in every state that they cannot do this, that Amazon is the retailer. Amazon must collect, regardless if you have nexus or not. For sales and use tax purposes, you're not retailers, you're suppliers, just like the National Retail Federation says you are. You're not the ones we go to for the tax. If you're selling through a retailer that has nexus in the state, and Amazon has conceded nexus in every state, they collect in every state right now, then you're not responsible for collecting the tax. I can't stop the fact that the states are going to go after you. I think the idea that every single one of you is going to litigate and that's some path is nonsense. 99.9% of you would not be litigating this. Even if you were caught up in it, you find your test case and you just sort of sit and wait behind it, but you're not going to be the ones bearing the cost of litigation. I really don't even know how some of these sellers are going to afford the cost of compliance. Like I said, I don't know what's worse for these sellers. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Well, so let me ask this then. Go ahead, Scott. Scott, go ahead.
Just one point, which is I would love to see this tested in court, and I would happily drop sales tax management from our accounting services for all of our clients if we could. I think it's a huge burden on our clients. It's a noticeable cost, and that I would love to see this challenged in a consistent way and clear up all of this in a clear way. And so that one of my customers isn't fighting multiple states and anything else. So I'm all for simplifying all of this and having it be clear, but we're kind of stuck where we are today.
But it's also kind of clear that the states don't know. And we have the state of South Carolina publicly fighting Amazon, which is a big clue to everybody that if the states don't even know their own law well enough, if they can't even figure it out, that there's the possibility that or strong likelihood that you're not the ones on the hook for this in the first place. And there's states out there that don't even know what's right or wrong. And maybe there's 23 states who are taking a position, and there's a lot of states that aren't. And there's internal discussions within California as to whether or not it's you or whether it's Amazon. It's pretty obvious that you cannot be held. I mean, at the end of the day, you would not be held responsible for this tax. It's just completely
absurd. Read my mind, Paul, actually, because I did want to talk about the states, because that is a really interesting thing. As an Amazon seller looking at this problem, trying to make a decision, I see that there's actually only 8 or 9 FBA states that are participating and the others are not. So I was going to ask you guys if you had any insight into why they're not. And so you started to provide the example of South Carolina, but if either of you two have anything more to say about why only some states are participating and others have abstained, we'd all be very interested to hear why.
It's all conjecture, but basically what Paul's saying, either they didn't think their laws backed it up and they get challenged, or they're waiting for court cases to bounce through to go up and challenge Quill, or they just decided they didn't want to waive those fees, that they made their own estimate on how much that is. And they're willing to focus their sales tax groups to go after and be able to find and audit those larger sellers and to get those funds. And we haven't hit the point where the news is hitting our community where some of these larger, 10, 20, 50, $100 million sellers are put out of business or fighting it. Okay. We've heard about My Pillow that got caught and paid $1 million. Okay. Because one of their employees that they fired turned them in. So we don't have that kind of story to show, and it'll rile the whole community. they'll all speak up, which is where we're heading. So or whatever other reasons they decided not to, they just couldn't make a decision in time while the other states really wanted to hurry up and get part of this holiday season tax revenue. It could have been a number of reasons, but and they could be just a ton of reasons, but where we're at, they decided not to.
I have spoken to states on this, and many states do find this as a matter of policy to be just absolutely repugnant. I've spoken to many states, large states, about this.
Who are these people, Paul, if you don't mind just letting us know about, you don't have to drop names, but they're representatives. Right. Who are
tax
they?
Commissioners, the top people in some really important states just find this to be repugnant. California is having its current sort of battle internally. I have a memo from Fiona Ma, who's on the Board of Equalization, saying that while they're not getting into the legal of it, they don't think as a matter of policy they should be pursuing individual sellers. That's not the appropriate approach. They should be pursuing Amazon, but that's the reality. States don't like what the MTC are doing. There are a lot of states that really don't find it to be they just can't, grasp why states are doing it. They don't want to be a part of it. And that right there tells me something. Now, if My Pillow paid $1 million, I want My Pillow to give me a call because I want to go file a refund claim and get that money back because they're basically, these companies are being scared out of into compliance, and it's a complete violation of constitutional law, of state law for any of these companies to be collecting at this point on Amazon sales. So hopefully My Pillow, we can get your money back because this is ridiculous. And
all right, so let me ask this next question. Let's move on and maybe stop our speculations as to why the states are taking the positions they're taking. That's hard to do, but I asked the question, right? I posed the question because I was curious. It's fascinating why only some states have participated and others have abstained. But now let me ask this question to you, Scott, because I know you've done some work in this area. I'm an Amazon seller, and I'm hearing your message, which is essentially that this is an opportunity that you probably don't want to pass up. And if I do participate in the Amnesty program, what is it going to cost me? Is there a financial burden associated with starting to collect sales tax? Because, I think Amazon sellers understand this, but we're just talking about collecting an additional amount on top of your product sales. So we're not talking about eating into your profits necessarily. We're talking about collecting an additional percentage of tax on top and then turning it over to the states. So is there a cost, though, associated with it? Yeah. What is the burden?
There is. So first, one, it's overly complicated. So I would suggest, but it's not. So you can do all the paperwork yourself and not pay to participate in the Amnesty program. And there are companies from that we partner with that will charge between $300 or $400, and there's some people that charge up to $1,000 to fill out the form just for the Amnesty piece. But it's overly complicated. If you don't want to screw it up or do whatever else, you can work with these companies. If you don't mind, I'll pause a little bit. If you don't mind, I can drop some names. I really like the sales tax system, has a nice program, both because they charge, I think, $395 to do it, because they'll do the paperwork. But then then you apply. Once you've applied and you get approved for the VDA for the 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever number of states you choose to do, then you actually have to register. Okay, so you get approved. That means all that stuff's waived. That you still have to apply for sales tax licenses and income tax. Okay, with the Secretary of State in each of these states. It's generally for sales tax for anybody you talk, salt experts, other people that do it, about $100 to do a registration in the state for you. Okay, I would say for most people, if you're getting busy and you're trying to focus on growing your business, pay someone to do it instead of losing hours and hours and hair to dealing with multiple states.
And you're saying $100? Did you say $100 per state
and fee?
Okay, but did you say $100 to register per state, Scott? Just to be clear, or total?
Per state, correct. Or an hour or two of your time. So a safe number with the state fees for income tax and everything else is roughly $200 per state. Okay. So if you're not registered in any states or only your own state and you're adding another 20 states, you're talking $4,000. Okay. So not small numbers. So just to put the math, if you're only doing the 9, amnesty states, you're looking at $1,800. It can be a little bit less, but that's general, or equal that in time. Okay. And frustration and whatever else, dealing with the states and getting the forms, because there's tricky stuff and everything else. You can go through companies that will specifically get you to that point where you've gone through the amnesty, or you've registered, or you decide to register without the amnesty. That's your general cost, okay? Then you are looking at a number of choices. You can look at a tool like TaxShar, which is great, okay, which is going to charge you a base monthly fee between, I think, $20 to $500, depending on the size of seller you are. And then roughly the general number is $27 per return. So if you're filing monthly, 12 times 27. If you're filing quarterly, 4 times 27. And if you're really small, you might be annually, you might be paying $20 a month to taxify and then $27 a year per state. So it's kind of a sliding scale. In general, it's going to roughly cost you in tools spread across, especially if you're a bigger seller and it's monthly, a good safe number, just a budget, even though it'll be less, is about $50 per month per state. Okay. That it can be a lot less than that. You can scale it, but if you look to outsource it to a SALT company, so we don't do sales tax as a standalone service. We only do it as part of our accounting. I don't want to do just sales tax. And there are other businesses out there and partners we have that will take over sales tax and just take that over. If you don't want to deal with notices, you want someone to help configure Amazon, and then you've got that slight 2% that you pay Amazon to collect sales tax. So if you collect $100 in sales tax, you're paying Amazon $2 to collect that sales tax for you, which is insult to injury. So those are your costs. And then correct, tax in the US is tax exclusive. You sell a $100 product, they're going to tack on 6 to 8, 10% tax and give that to you as a separate bit of money. You escrow it, set it on your balance sheet. It's a liability to your business and you pay it in monthly, quarterly, annually. So that's the cost that it does. So it's to all in, you're looking at between $44,000, $4,500 to have somebody else take care of it for you, and then the monthly cost per state. So hopefully that helps.
That was very clear.
How much it's going to cost them per month. But if you're doing all 20 states, you're probably going to pay between $1,500 and $1,500 per month, not counting your time to do your sales tax compliant on an ongoing monthly basis. So hopefully those are good chunk numbers to help.
Well,
that is very quantifiable and helpful.
You have to file those annual registration fees every year. So you're going to pay that $4,500, whatever that is, every year. And then now we've got about I don't know how many challenges to Quill going up right now, going on in different states. We had the South Dakota Supreme Court just rule in favor of the taxpayer for the purposes of getting that up to the Supreme Court. So once Quill gets overturned, now you're filing in every state, and not just every state, you're filing in every parish in Louisiana. And then that $20 to $30 return goes up tremendously. And maybe you can do it yourself. You can hire a full-time employee. And then you have to factor in the income tax. And
well, yeah, and I didn't talk about that.
Yeah, income tax, and I don't care what strategy you want to employ, most likely you're going to be paying income tax if you're paying sales tax in the states that have it. Florida, Texas, if you're a single member LLC, you may not have to pay it because they don't tax individual personal income tax. So, but for the many states that do, you're talking $500 to $1,000 a return, and you may have to file not only a state LLC return, but you also have to file a state income tax return. So you're going to have to file a tax return sort of reporting your LLC income and then into the state based on the state's apportionment and all those fun things. And then you're going to have to flow that up to you. And then so you're going to have to file a state income tax return. So very easily could that cost of compliance just for 10 states get up to $20,000, $25,000 a year. It's not impossible. It's actually very probable. And that's the problem. And then when you get to all 50 states, it's easily possible you're in a 6-figure compliance burden, which is exactly why the whole thing is for 700 to 800,000 people. That would be or how many sellers are there? I don't even know, because once Quill's overturned, remember, it's not just FBA anymore, according to the states, it's everybody. Now everyone's in this sort of 6-figure compliance burden. It's complete nonsense.
So it's a pretty heavy financial burden. Another question that people regularly have is whether or not this is a one-time decision. Essentially, if I choose to participate in the Amnesty program, am I then locked in, and will I be tracked forever? Have I essentially signed my life away if I decide at a later date that I don't want in anymore? Now, that's a concern that people have. Do you have any thoughts there, gentlemen?
Unfortunately, if you're still selling and storing inventory in that business, now if you change your business model, then you can say that things have changed. But yeah, once you're in, you're really going to have to either have a strong CPA or a tax lawyer to make sure you're really clear when you deregister in those states that you can. And it's a pain, and they keep you on your lists, and you have to follow up, and they'll have created extra. I mean, there's just so much bureaucratic complexity that it's really, really painful, okay, to deregister out of state, especially California and others, that what you're doing is you're doing this and you're hoping either things change, or let's say that things change to the point where it really does clarify that everybody else has to comply. So if you're a larger business and you decide, you know what, I'm going to comply now, take care of it, even if I pay some extra overhead because they can't afford it. And if things shift to where it really does clarify where everybody has to comply, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, millions of sellers that are all of a sudden going to have to comply or go out of business. And so it's going to be a race to register if that happens. And all of these things are off in the future. All the court cases in the future, the clarification is in the future. It's just a decision of what you're going to do now.
Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to do now. The perfect lead. It's time to take action now. Sellers have been watching us for 45 plus minutes, ramble on about sales tax. So to Paul, I'm going to ask you first. The Amnesty program potentially expires in the next 2 weeks, as long as it sticks to the deadline that we're expecting. October 17th, if you're watching this at a later date, it's when it expires. What is the action that you recommend to sellers, Paul?
Listen, I think everybody has to make their own big person decision here and decide what they want to do. I know how I personally feel about it. If it were my business, I wouldn't participate, but that's just me. I'm not your lawyer. You need to look at your own facts, triage your own liability, and decide whether it might make sense. If you have a massive liability in Florida and you're okay with the risk that just by participating in this, you might also be exposing yourself to these other states, even if you think you're only participating in Florida, because the MTC can give your information away if they're given your name. They won't give it blanket. They won't blanketly turn it over, but if given a list of names, and your name is on it, they will turn it over. So, but if you have a big liability in Florida or Texas and there's no income tax risk there because of your structure, you got to make that decision yourself. What I'm trying to tell you as a lawyer who deals with this day in and day out, who has fought states and won on a regular basis for some of the biggest companies in the world, I just want you to know what you're up against. I want you to know what the law is, and that just because the states tell you it's right, and just because the MTC says it's right, they're often wrong. They're wrong more often than they're right, in my experience. And so you just need to know that. And I wish I could say something that would say they're not going to hunt you down, and they're not going to. I don't know what they're going to do. I think that what I'm trying to do is shine some real light on it, so that it becomes embarrassing for them. Basically, the fact that they think that they can get away with persecuting, mom and pop in Idaho and making them file as many tax returns as Google. I think that's just absolutely absurd, and that needs to be brought to public light. But you have to make your own decision what you want to do, and just realize that it might be all right today. You might just be complying with one or two states, but eventually the compliance cost might be enough to send most of these sellers out of business. And when we talk about monthly filing, quarterly filing, I speak to sellers all the time. They don't make very much money, but their gross sales are, millions, and they don't make very much in profit because the margins are so low. So they're in the monthly filing bracket, but they're not making enough money. So when you factor in the cost of monthly compliance at $30 a return, and then you start to multiply the number of states they have to file in, it starts to get real expensive real fast. And so
if your message is resonating with people, what action would you recommend, Paul? I know that you've got a movement going on or an effort going on, but how can people either get involved or at least reach out to you and connect with the people that are perhaps in resistance to this movement?
Sure. We set up a link on ecommerce.chris/tax to raise money to sort of, create a legal defense fund. And I think where we eventually need to go with this is eventually this needs to be a trade organization for Amazon sellers that represents their interests, not just in tax, but other things. But right now, tax is the flavor of the day. Could be IP protection and other things. But right now, tax is the urgency. And so, we've encouraged people to contribute on ecommerce.chris/tax, and you can put that link up. Unfortunately, we've had honestly, I was just looking at the numbers today. We've had 250 people contribute. And while some contributors have been really generous and contributed, and I've spoken to them personally, it's not enough to do what we want to do. It's not enough to file, basically cease and desist cases in various states and pushing back on your behalf. And so we haven't really accomplished that goal. It's not enough to hire the PR firms that we could hire to really shine a light on this publicly and really embarrass the states and make this probably go away. If we had that kind of support from the get-go, we could do it. But, so I urge you, if you're sitting on the fence or you're upset about this, don't get mad at me for telling you what's going on. Just, participate, contribute $1 or $2. We don't care. I mean, if every single person contribute a little bit, we would be doing a lot of noise right now. We'd be doing a lot to try to make this better for you guys, but I can't do it. It's unfortunately the
Paul,
lawyers.
will you be shutting down shop on October 17th when this Amnesty deal expires?
That's a good question. I don't know if I ever opened shop in the first place. I think I was in the wrong place in the wrong time, to be honest with you. And the fact that I wasn't in a situation where I was conflicted out of this. I don't know. I mean, I'll still be fighting. I still have a lot of people who are being pursued by states that need help, and we'll be handling their cases. And so there'll be those. And I think, yeah, after October 17th, we'll be doing what we can. I'm exploring, like I said, taking an action in Washington, which will have effect across the country. To basically highlight what's going on and how basically just disingenuous this action is by a lot of the states involved. So I don't plan to stop, but we need your support. And I think, like I said, where it goes from here is I think really we need to start thinking about a formal trade organization for the Amazon community so that things like this will never happen, so that no organization, whether tax, whether, bad IP, some lobbyist with IP policy that's not going to be good for the sellers, whatever that thing is, Amazon may be overreaching, that there's some sort of voice for the sellers as a whole. It needs to happen. That's become clear to me in the last 2 months more than anything, that you guys really do need a consolidated voice. I mean, I don't know any other collection of people as large as you that doesn't have it. So it's sort of like, it should have been done a long time ago. So we need to get it done right away. And so I'm going to work with a law firm or two and figure out how we can start that process for you guys, and then hopefully get that rolling. And so that way you guys have a more consolidated and stronger voice when things like this happen again.
Great. And to Scott, I pose the same question to you. We're 2 weeks out. October 17th is when the Amnesty program expires officially. What is your message to Amazon sellers?
So first, I support what Paul's doing. And if you're really frustrated by this, contribute a little bit of money, because there isn't a voice. There are voices out there that fight all taxes everywhere, and some retail foundations and other things that fight them, but they're not representing the specific seller. But make a decision. Just look at it enough to make a decision. Okay. Decide to participate in the Amnesty. Decide whether or not you're going to register and collect going forward. Decide to do nothing. If you want more details about your business, you either need to go talk to your CPA now and consult with them. Now, some CPAs are really strong on sales tax. Some know nothing about it. Some are only good in their state. So keep in mind that your CPA might be a great trusted person to do your taxes, but you want to talk to them to see who they know, or you want to reach out to a SALT expert who will talk about your facts. Paul mentioned that. What is your specific situation? And provide you more details related to your piece, and then make a decision. You don't want something to change, and it's up to you to decide whether you're willing to spend the money to comply, and you will sleep better at night, and you think that's the right decision for your business to comply, even if everything changes and that's the wrong decision down the line where no one has to comply, and then you deregister and go through all that process and you have more cost on the other end. Or if it goes the other direction, you're protected from this potential liability. Because keep in mind, even from an accounting perspective, we don't put this potential outstanding sales tax liability on your financials, but it sticks not just to the business, but to the owner. And if the states really do enforce it, it sticks to you through bankruptcy, and it sticks to the owner after you've sold the company, and it can go way back in time. So you want to be aware of it for your own decision.
Okay, well, to the Amazon seller, to the viewer who's listened now for an hour or so, I really hope this information has been helpful for you. I hope we've done what we intended to do at the outset, which is give you the information you need so that you can make a decision as the Amnesty program comes close to expiration here. If you have additional questions, you can leave them below on YouTube here. We can start a public discussion there. It's a wonderful place, a public forum for us all to participate. But you can also reach out to our fantastic guests. You can find our man Paul at ecommercechris.com. You can find him there. And then if you want to get in touch with Scott and his services, which is catchingclouds.net, we'll leave YouTube links and everything so you can get in touch with these guys. Gents, I think you've done a wonderful service for the seller community today. We want information, and we're so thankful to have experts like you who are willing to take your time and share your opinions, your perspectives. So thanks very much for attending today.
Thank you. Hope this helped.
All right. Take care, everyone.